Stop. Okay. Okay, so thanks for coming to Laracon, wrapping up this first day. This has kind of been like an experimental day because, one, it's the first time we've ever had a 3-day conference, and then also having like longer kind of tutorial, in-depth style talks. So hopefully it was good. Hopefully it wasn't too overwhelming. I know that was like some super dense info, all 3 of them. But hopefully you pulled out a few things that were useful. And give us some feedback, for next year, because it's always sort of a process in terms of like how we're organizing these things and what's going to be most valuable for people. So like this year, for example, is like super technical, whereas last year was kind of 50-50 technical and soft talks. And this year, basically every talk has some kind of technical focus, although Jack McDade has told me his may not be super technical, but other than that, 90% of the talks are technical. So yeah, I've got a bunch of notes for this talk. This is like a whirlwind of a week for me, finishing up for this talk, finishing up for the conference. So I may refer to my phone a little bit, so sorry about that. But before I get started, thanks again to all the sponsors. You saw Laravel News and Larajobs earlier, but Vehicles outside, Bugsnags outside, Sentry's outside, and so is Nexmo as well. And RealPage is not here, but they're based here in Louisville and has been a gold sponsor again this year. They were last year as well, so thanks to them. So stop by their booths. Let's see what else I have in my notes here. So Laravel actually recently turned 5 years old back in around June of 2011 was when Laravel 1.0 came out, and I was still doing .NET at the time. I didn't have a PHP job. And I think about 6 or 7 months after that, I came on board at Userscape after Ian reached out to me and worked there for a few years before I launched Forge and Envoyer and kind of went out doing my own thing with Laravel. And this is our 4th Laracon, so I'm just so thankful to the community, for all your support, to bring this many people to Kentucky to talk about really geeky stuff for 3 days, and it's a big money commitment to fly out here, get hotels. So thanks so much. It truly means a lot to have so much support in the community and on Twitter and here in person. So this talk is different than my past couple years' talks. So in 2014, I introduced Forge at Laracon, which was kind of a commercial, it is a commercial offering. And then last year, I introduced Spark, which was also a commercial offering. And this year is totally different, actually. It's sort of a whirlwind of new open source stuff that I've been playing with and I think is cool, and that will all be available, freely for when Laravel 5.3 comes out. Which, speaking of Laravel 5.3 coming out, it probably needs another week or 2 on documentation. The code is done, so I would imagine somewhere between here and Laracon EU, it will all come out. And of course, all the code I showed today will no longer be a secret after today, so all that will go up on GitHub, within the next day or 2, so you can start poking around that way. So yeah, I'm gonna start. First, let me start with like a little bit more of the stats of how Laravel is doing lately, kind of a state of the Laravel briefly. On packages, I went out and checked, and Laravel over the past 30 days has been downloaded 750,000 times, which is more than any other framework I could find on packages by a decent number. So it's about 25,000 package downloads a day, which is a lot of people downloading the framework. And it's got 50,000 Twitter followers, 25,000 GitHub stars, lots of forks, and so I think Laravel is just growing and growing, and I'm really happy with the spot we're in 5.3. I think it's one of my favorite releases, and you'll see why, some of the cool stuff in this talk. And one of the coolest things I wanted to mention over the past year or so with Laravel is people contributing to the framework. And there's been a couple people that I just wanted to mention real quick, and one is Mohammed Saeed, who I believe is from Egypt. He contributed a lot of stuff to the validation component in Laravel that was like not super glamorous stuff to contribute. Like it didn't really get like a lot of fanfare on Twitter or like some big presentation or anything, but he contributed a lot of features around the array validation in the validator, which is super complicated. And that was really cool because that's really one of the first times I felt like someone was starting to understand that piece of the framework even better than I do at this point. And it takes a huge cognitive load like off of me that I can focus on other things. And when I get a pull request on validation, I can say, hey, Mohammed, what do you think about this contribution? And like he can kind of take it from there. So that's really nice, and like that's something that I had wondered when that would happen, when I would have people that I can ask, like, hey, you know more about this than I do. What do you think about this? So I'm really thankful to him, and I wanted to mention one other person that couldn't be here that I thought made a good contribution is a guy named Anse from Slovenia over in Europe, and he contributed a total rewrite of the Eloquent scope stuff. If you've used like soft deletes in Eloquent, that works off what we call scopes. And it was sort of gnarly to write your own scopes. So if you're just like using scopes, you may not have noticed like it was a little gnarly under the hood to work with that stuff. And he came in and like had this genius idea to like clean it all up, and it's so much better than it used to be. And I think that was in 5.2. And that's another person, like when a PR comes in about scopes, I just say, hey, Anse, can you look at this? And like that takes a huge load off because that's a very complicated part of the framework. So lots of other people have contributed to the framework over the past year or so, obviously since the last Laracon, but those were two kind of unique situations that I felt like, wow, this is really cool that the community is getting so in depth in the framework that they can kind of take over from me in those areas, which is really nice. Let's see, so I guess we'll just jump right in. There's not really any slides on this talk, and there's a lot of really risky stuff, like lots of live coding, little internet dependencies mixed in. So living kind of dangerous here. Hopefully it all goes off without a hitch. So just jumping in, let's just talk about like Laravel 5.3 at the highest level, which is sort of, let's just start with the folder structure, which I've talked a little bit about on Twitter. Let me jump to my folder structure note here. So there's been a couple changes, and really one of the first ones you might notice is there's a routes file. I don't know of any way to increase that font size with the sidebar, but there's a routes folder right here at the root of the project. And this was kind of a tricky situation for us to figure out because it used to be in 5.2 an app HTTP routes. It was just right here, I guess, an app HTTP. And that wasn't really like a bad location. It was kind of out of place because that whole app directory is PSR4 auto-loaded. So everything else in that directory was classes except for this one file, which kind of was like the sore thumb sticking out in that whole structure. So me and Jeffrey and a few other people, Adam and Matt, got together and kind of talked about this and came up with this solution to just put it in the routes or in the root directory, because it's kind of more almost like a configuration file in a way, in the way it just maps URIs to controllers and kind of wires everything up that way. But another thing you might notice about it is there's two routes files now, actually. There's a web.php and there's an api.php. And I think this is a really better way of structuring things out of the box. And these two files correspond to the two middleware groups. So in your HTTP kernel in a fresh Laravel app, you have two middleware groups. And these are supposed to represent the two ways HTTP requests typically come into your application. So they either come in through what we call the web, which we really mean through like a web user interface that has session state, it has like forms, and people are clicking buttons. And so you can see some of these middlewares are like encrypt your cookies, start your session, verify your CSRF token, because you're coming through a web UI where you're clicking around. And then the other way you come in is through an API, and that has a different set of middleware that we assign to those routes. So out of the box, we have a rate limiter built into Laravel. So we're saying we want to throttle you to, I think this is 60 requests in 1 minute. And you can kind of tweak those settings. And then we assign the bindings middleware, which is the substitute bindings, which translates your implicit Eloquent model bindings, which you should definitely check out in the documentation if you haven't used. Okay, so these two files correspond to those two groups. You have web and API. And if you look in your route service provider where these are loaded, you will see a map web routes, which puts them in that middleware group right here. And it loads the web file. So it's not like you can't change these files. You can put these anywhere you want. You just change this path right here. And then it has a map API routes, which puts that in the API middleware group and also adds this API authentication middleware, which we'll talk a little bit about later. Okay, and that loads, of course, the api.php. So that's really how routes are set up. Now, that's not really a breaking change, right? So if you're upgrading from 5.2 to 5.3, your route service provider is still loading from HTTP directory. Laravel doesn't really care about any of that. So this is mainly just for, new Laravel 5.3 applications will really only be affected by this change. If you upgrade, you're not really going to notice that unless you just want to move to that structure. Then you can do that if you want, if you like it. Okay, so that's kind of the routes folder change. We're kind of going to start small. We'll build up big at the end, hopefully. Hopefully you like it. So another change, the other biggest change to the folder structure before I move any deeper is this app directory also looks a little different. So in 5.2, you had probably a good 4 or 5 additional folders here besides this console exception to HTTP providers. However, those 4 or 5 folders were just empty out of the box, and they would be populated like if I ran some artisan command or something. And it was getting to the point where the app directory felt like kind of just big out of the box, and maybe I'm not really using all those folders, or I don't need them right now, I'm just starting my app. And I didn't really want to like put them in people's face before you really need them. And so basically how it works now is they will just be created. They're created at the exact same spot, so none of them moved around, but they're created like if I run artisan make job Laracon, it will make the jobs directory and it will create it just like it always did. So there's really no difference in terms of the structure. It's just more of like a just-in-time creation of these folders, which I think is a little cleaner out of the box. It just gives it like a little bit of a leaner feel out of the box. When you first start playing with the framework, you don't really are overwhelmed with all these terms like policies or listeners or whatever, jobs. So that's just a little thing. I mean, again, not really a breaking change. If you're upgrading, there's not really, you already have those folders and it doesn't matter to you. So everything works the same. So yeah, let's move on from folder structure. The next thing I want to talk about is, let's see, some of the front-end stuff and like auth scaffolding in Laravel. So in Laravel 5.3 coincides with a new release of Laravel Elixir 6.0, which if you look at the default gulp file, it no longer says browserify for your JavaScript, it says Webpack. So Elixir 6.0 does Webpack out of the box, and it still supports browserify. So if you're on browserify, like all you do is just pull in the browserify extension for Elixir. But out of the box, we ship with Webpack because this is the cool thing now, in JavaScript. I don't know. I asked Jeffrey for like a one-liner for like why is Webpack better than browserify, and I don't know. What I come away with is just like, this is what you do now. But I think there are more to it, and I think the gist of what Jeffrey told me is if you have like already some custom Webpack config that you're doing, like you can kind of hook that into Elixir, and it all works out of the box. It also supports Rollup.js, which is pretty slick. I played with it the other night, and one of the cool things about Rollup is it like, correct me if I'm wrong, somebody, but I think it examines your code and will like see code you're not calling in your JavaScript, and it will just not put that in your compiled JavaScript. So your compiled JavaScript is like a lot smaller and more condensed than stuff like browserify or Webpack would create. So Elixir supports both of those. You can just pull in the Elixir rollup thing, and all you really do is just change that to rollup. Yeah, so if you want to check that out, that could be another flavor of the month for JavaScript asset compilation.
Webpack 2 is going to have tree shaking.
Yeah, I saw that on Twitter. Webpack 2 is also going to have the tree shaking.
Rollups is still better, though.
Rollups is still better.
Fight me!
Okay, after party fight. Okay, so yeah, so that's there's other Elixir stuff. Let me just go ahead and show you. So when you if I compile stuff, I get a better output in Elixir 6.0. So like I get this little table of like the task, what it did, where it got my source files, and where it put the resulting files. So just some like kind of user experience changes there with Elixir, and that's all Jeffrey really. I didn't do any of that. So thank you, Jeffrey, for better output. And okay, the next thing I want to talk about with front end is hopefully not too controversial, but so there's been this thing in front end where Vue has gotten really popular, and I really love Vue. I think Vue has a very similar philosophy to Laravel. And people used to always say, like, this was a couple of years ago, they were like, Taylor, you should write Laravel JS, or you should write a JavaScript framework. And I would always say, of course, I don't have the skills to do that because I don't know JavaScript that well. But like when I saw Vue, I was like, if I were to have the skills, this is like probably what I would have hoped mine turn out like, hopefully, in terms of like API and stuff. So I just think it's a really cool framework. I think it really has the potential to be the biggest framework because of its focus on sort of approachability. The documentation is like way better than other things I've seen. So I'm just really thankful to Evan and thankful that he came out and has made such a great tool for us, and that he's able to work on it full time now, which is awesome, and just means great things for the ecosystem, because when you have someone working full time on an open source project, kind of like I do with Laravel, or like Evan does with Vue, like it is insane the amount of stuff you can get done. A lot of people don't have that privilege of being able to do that. So anyway, when you used to do make auth, let's just go ahead and do it again here. So this is the new Laravel landing page, I think, which is kind of nice, I think, but it's kind of subtle. But anyway, it throws up these login and register links if I do the make auth scaffolding. And what this used to look like is it would generate a layout app. And this used to have like calls to CDN.js or something to pull in Bootstrap and to pull in jQuery to sort of give you this scaffolding for the login screens and the register screens and all of that. And just to pull all that in, we pulled in all those dependencies like right there in the layout. So one thing I did with 5.3 is kind of just move that to NPM, which I think is kind of more like what modern JavaScript workflows are like now. So if you look at the package.json, instead of like having jQuery and stuff in here, you can just pull it in your package.json. So we have Elixir, jQuery, and stuff like that. So that it makes it kind of easy to update it, so you can have your version numbers right here, and it's all sort of, you know, just better. There's better auth styling out of the box. It just looks a little better, and this is kind of just inspired by Spark, that we have a little bit cleaner experience, look and feel out of the box, has a cooler, calmer look. But what I do want to mention is we ship with a new in assets.js. We have a bootstrap.js, which loads this stuff up. And this is again I was in programming mode. This is again to sort of give you a more modern workflow. And what we do is we actually set up Vue for you. So if you don't want this, you can just delete that. But what it does do is, so if you're building an API, you have to do things like put the CSRF token in the headers for all your outgoing requests. So we just have an interceptor that does that for you, and it's like works with Laravel out of the box, because we send an XSRF token cookie, and this just grabs that, puts it in the header. So everything is like ready to go out of the box for a modern JavaScript setup. And it's kind of like a balancing act, I guess, to sort of do this without being like heavy-handed, opinionated, and a way that doesn't feel like kind of sleazy. So I just kept it kind of light. Like, I mean, it just sets that up, sets up the CSRF stuff, and you're good to go. But what's nice is that with Elixir, it actually includes support for the single file Vue components. So with Vue, you can put all your JavaScript and templates in one .vue file, and then it's really convenient because your template and your component that controls that template is just right there in one file, and it's really nice workflow, and I've like really been sold on it lately, and I was super skeptical of that workflow actually, because it was so like against what I had done before. But then once I tried it, I just like, there's no way I could ever envision wanting to do it any other way. So in Laravel 5.3, you can either support for that out of the box because of Elixir 6 and the cool new stuff that's in there. So like I have this example.vue, and you can see I have a template declared here and a script declared here, and that's what it looks like. I've already run gulp on this, so it's already compiled. And so right out of the box, I can come to my home.blade, and I can just drop in this template, or this component, sorry. And when I load that up, I don't even know if I have an account. Let me see here. Oh, I do have an account. Okay. you can see I get that example component like right out of the box. So it's super easy to get started with that kind of workflow if you've ever been kind of hesitant to do that. At the same time, if you don't like that kind of workflow, you can just delete that file, or if you want to keep some parts of it and delete other parts of it, you can do that too. But it's just a couple files that are different out of the box, but I think provides more of like a structure out of the box for like a real JavaScript workflow and not just sort of kind of lame like it was in 5.2 when you do the make auth. It wasn't really like a legit setup like I would actually use in a real project. So this is just to get you more to the real world. Yeah, so hopefully that's not too scary, but I think it's going to be better for people once they jump into the framework. They're like, oh, I can just start writing my JavaScript and it's nice and pretty and great. So yeah, so that's folder structure and sort of generic front-end auth scaffolding stuff. So now let's kind of jump into some general features that are new in Laravel 5.3. So let me just convert back here to my typical stuff. Whoops. Let's see. I'm just going to revert all that. All right. So again, I'm just going to start kind of basic, and we'll get to some of the bigger stuff in just a minute. But there's some new stuff around controllers. This won't really be super applicable to everyone, but if you write Laravel packages, this is actually a pretty nice feature. So in Laravel 5.2, when you defined a controller, which I'll just put like right here, you had to do this extends controller stuff, which is in the Illuminate routing component, or extends controller. And there's nothing wrong with that necessarily in Laravel, but if you're writing a package, it was kind of like a pain to have to pull in all of Illuminate routing if you just need to like write a couple controllers and just test them and stuff. So in 5.3, you actually don't have to extend anything. You can just use a plain class for a controller if you want, and I can just define a method right here and return hello world and comment that out. And if I route to this, I can just do something at handle. And hopefully we get hello world, which we do. So you don't really have to extend anything. And again, if you're in Laravel all the time and you're never writing packages, that's maybe not that big a deal to you. But if you're writing packages, check that out in 5.3 because it will make your testing easier because you can just new up the class, pass stuff into it, and you don't have to pull in all of Illuminate routing if you don't want to. A second new feature in Laravel is some people like to just have like a single method on their controller. So I typically stick to like, when I do my controllers, I just have the rest actions, and if I need a different action, I just make another controller if I can't name it one of those actions. But some people like to have a single action controller. Like say you have a controller that's like just super complicated, and you just want that just do one thing. In Laravel 5.3, you can also do just like invoke on a class, and then you can just specify no method when you register the route. So this will just, if there's no method specified, it will just try to invoke the class in general. So if I call this, I should just get the same result, which I do hello world. So yeah, another really little thing, but if you're into that kind of thing, that is supported in Laravel 5.3. And like I said, in what I try to do with my controllers, just a brief aside, is if you feel your controller getting too big, try to keep yourself to where you're only using the 7 method names that are defined on like a resource controller in Laravel. So like index, store, create, edit, update, whatever, delete. And if you find yourself having to use another word, just make another controller where you can use that word, if that makes sense. So that will actually solve a lot of your complexity problems I found in a lot of apps, is if you just stick really hardcore to that rule. So anyway, that's a brief aside, which I do mention in the Laravel 5.3 documentation. I'm trying to add like little tidbits like that, like little tips. Okay, I'll clear this out again. Moving on to a new topic, done with controllers. Another cool new little thing, just to get warmed up. Console kernel. In 5.2 and all other previous versions of Laravel, if you wanted to write your own artisan command, you had to do like a make command or make console, create a class, and then sort of fill out the class. And in 5.3, we added a way to just define a console command right in line using a closure, basically just like a route. Which is super cool if you just need a quick command, just a few commands in your project. You don't really have to make any classes. Like I can just have this build, and then you specify the arguments just like you would in the signature parameter of the console class, and then it just passes me the parameters just like a route basically. And then from within this closure, I have access to all the command stuff because it's binding that closure to the command instance using the bind to method in PHP. So like I can call this error and spit out some error text or this warning or whatever, and that all works great. So just to show you, like we'll call build Laracon or something like that. So if I go on my command line, make this a little bigger for you. And I do list, you can see there's a build command, build Laracon, and it calls that closure. So again, just another like little thing that's a little nicer in 5.3. And there's really a lot of things like that that are sort of just kind of polished up. And you can add it. Oh, that's tiny. And you can add like some description here, because when you notice I did that command, I didn't have one. And Sublime crashed, which has been doing like a little more than usual lately, I feel like. But I'm still not moving to PHP Storm. Anyway, yeah, I can call describe and give it some description, and PHP artisan list, and I get some description. So you can write. I think you have access to all the same features if you use the closure. It's just a different style. Anyway, so yeah, and I thought I'm not like brave enough to do this, but I was talking with Adam, and I thought it would be like we thought it would be super cool if you had like a what you could do. I'm just throwing this out there. Don't tweet that I told you to do this. I'm not recommending this. I'm just saying it's a novelty thing that's kind of cool. If you go into your routes folder, we could, if we wanted to, make a console.routes or console routes. And let's just pretend that these are all the routes into our application, HTTP and console. And we could just come in here. Let's just copy this. And let's just do an old require base path routes console.php. Does that look right? I think that's right. Let's just paste that in here. We don't need this yucky this stuff. And we can just say like that, like a routes file, which is kind of cool, I feel like, to be able to define all your commands in this routes file using closures. And I think this should work, hopefully. Yeah, I can call build Laracon. Again, that's just an unofficial thing. I'm just saying. I'm just throwing it out there, like, if you like it. But it doesn't come like that out of the box, and so yeah, that's up to you. Okay, moving on to something totally different. Another thing I want to mention, or wanted to mention, because I've actually gotten a few emails about this over the past couple of years, is queue workers. And I have a separate project for this, but how many of you use queue workers in Laravel? Okay, a lot. So this is going to be pretty good news, hopefully. In Laravel 5.1 and maybe 5.0 even, have you ever had a queue worker that like, it was still running, but it wasn't processing any jobs? Has that ever happened? Yeah, okay. So hopefully that's a lot harder to get in that situation in Laravel 5.3. And the reason is there's quite a few under the hood improvements to Laravel 5.3 queues. There's not really any API changes involved with it, but under the hood, it's kind of a different beast in terms of how it works. So what we do now, or what we're going to do in 5.3 is we sort of have one process that's now forking child processes. And we didn't used to use forking to do the processes, but what that lets us do is it lets us use the process control functions in PHP to set basically alarms to say if this job hasn't died, this child process hasn't died within 30 seconds, then let's just kill it off because it's frozen or something like that. So that's really nice because I can set a timeout for say like a minute and say, hey, if any jobs don't finish or take longer than that, like something has gone haywire. And you can adjust that based on your app. Some of your jobs might take a minute or might take 5 minutes. So you can just tweak the values according to your app, but it will kind of monitor it and let you know when that's going on. So I'll kind of show you an example of what I mean. So let me go ahead into this project and start a queue worker. Now, one difference with Laravel queues is when you just do queue work, that's now the equivalent of queue work daemon. You don't have to say daemon anymore. It's just queue work. If you want to run one job, which is what this used to do, you just say once. So that's a little bit of a CLI change, but it's just a little cleaner just to say queue work instead of having to pass the daemon thing. Yeah, so let's go ahead and run this. And what's going to happen here is, oh no, I didn't do that right. Let's go ahead and set a timeout for 5 seconds. So we're going to say if any job takes longer than 5 seconds, let's go ahead and kill that off. All right, so I start that up. Let's see, this frozen job. What this does is it's just going to sleep for 10 seconds. So this is beyond our 5-second timeout. And in theory, the queue worker will, or the master queue process will see this, it will kill it off, and it will throw an exception that says like queue child process took longer than it should have, or something like that. All right, so I've got this frozen route, which is going to dispatch this frozen job out, and we're just going to watch this log file for like exceptions that come in. So I think this is on queues.dev frozen. I'm using valet. All right, so that's out there, and it may take a few seconds for this to pop up because it's going to spin for 5 seconds. And you can see right there, queue child process timed out. So again, if you've ever had that problem with queues in previous versions of Laravel, hopefully this will like solve all of your queue woes, and you'll be in queue bliss. Anyway, but the process is still running. It's not frozen. So if I come down here to my working job, which just says I actually work, and I push that out onto the queue, we should see a log entry, for that. And this one, it might be retrying. See, it's retrying that one. And there's the I actually work. So I didn't specify like a limit of retry attempts, so it's just going to keep retrying that frozen one. But anyway, you can see it's not totally frozen. It's actually still processing real jobs that actually work. So yeah, I've had a few people email me about that, on forwards that their queue worker gets stuck. And what usually happens is it's like an HTTP call to some external service is just like hanging, and your queue worker is just sitting there forever, and you sort of have to kill it off, and it's a pain. So hopefully this will cure a lot of that. So that is just a brief note about queue improvements in Laravel. All right, so I think that's it for queue workers. All right, so moving on to some kind of more advanced, interesting stuff. I want to talk about a new package, a new optional package called Laravel Scout, which I've been working on about a month or two ago and finished it up and was kind of saving it and kind of just still prepping it and stuff. But Scout is, again, optional. It's like Cashier in that it's not included with Laravel by default. So it's something you have to pull in with, Composer require Laravel Scout. But what it is basically a driver-based full-text search solution for Eloquent, which was kind of inspired by my work all the way back at Userscape, which I've been gone a year and a half, and I'm sort of still like pulling little nuggets like this was a pain or that was a pain. But we had to do full text search across all our help desk tickets. And we used Elasticsearch, and it was like, I have to admit, pretty painful to set all that up and get all that search going. And I kind of had it in the back of my mind, like I want to come back and like make that a little better. And so Scout is a driver-based package where you can write different search backend drivers, and it sort of all hooks into Eloquent with observers, and it keeps your search up to date and all that good stuff, which I'll show you. So for this demo, I've actually written a driver using Algolia, which does all the Laravel documentation search, and is probably the best search service I've seen. It's got a really nice UI. I don't have to mess around with any like configuration files to specify like how I want to rank my attributes in terms of order of importance on my search. And yeah, but where I need y'all to come in is to maybe contribute drivers that you know about. So if you know about Elasticsearch, jump in there after this code's on GitHub. You only have to really fill in like 4 different methods. It's not a lot to fill in necessarily, and that's all you have to do. And then it plugs in like just like a cache driver, or just like a queue driver. You can have an Elasticsearch driver for Scout, or an Algolia search driver, or someone can write a MySQL full text index search driver, whatever you want to do, I guess. But anyway, we'll be using Algolia for this demo just because I do like them so much. I'm not paid to say I like them too much. It's just that they give us the documentation search for free, and that's what kind of got me interested in trying it out, and it just makes for a really good demo. So let's go ahead and pull up Algolia so we can kind of keep an eye on our stuff as we're doing this. All right, let me log in here. basically the app I've got set up here is just going to be like we have blog posts, and we're going to add them to this full text search index and keep them up to date and then do some search operations on them. So here I am in my Scout app. I'll just kind of leave that there. But how this works actually is if I go to my post model, you'll see I've got use Laravel Scout searchable, and I just use searchable on my model that I want to be searchable. And you can do customization on like which attributes you want to be searchable, how you want those formatted. And I'm not really going to dive into that level of customization. So I'm just going to let it do the default, where it's just basically indexing the toArray function on the model and putting that up in the search index. You know, your most basic search, which will work for a lot of stuff. So all I've done is add that and then add the Scout service provider in my app config, and that's really all I've set up so far. So I've got a database for this. I have a database for each little part of this. Let's see let's go ahead and run those migrations. All right. So the first thing we can do is we can make a new post and we can save it to our database. Now, like I said, the searchable trait is going to hook in to Eloquent's events. So Eloquent raises events, like if you save something or you update something or you delete something, there's an event that's raised, and Scout can listen to that and say, okay, I need to update my search index. Okay, so if I hit this route, I'm just gonna, just a typical Eloquent call, save something in the database. Hopefully this works. Let's see. All right, done. And now if I go to Algolia, it should be pushed up into my search index. I need to go to indexes. And it will just give you a little kind of a JSON view of what's in your index. And there it is. So there's my record that I saved in the database. You can see it just automatically synced out there. I didn't have to do really anything extra in Eloquent. So I'll just kind of work down this file. I've got examples all through this routes file where I'll kind of show you like the different things you can do. So if I pull that post in my database, you can see I've got post ID 1. So I'm going to pull it here because we're going to change the title to Laracon updated post. And then if I do post save, we want that to update it in our search so that our search and our database are in sync. So if I call post update or scout/update, refresh this, and we should see an updated title in our search index. So we see Laracon updated post. So automagic stuff going on. Then same with delete. You know, if I delete this post, it should go away from my search index. So I'll hit scout.dev/delete. And if we hit this, it should be just an empty index. Great. So that's basically just the most basic operations with Scout that you can do. Now, going on to some kind of a little more advanced stuff. So say you want to load up like a handful of classes and you don't really want to sync them to search right now. So there's different ways you can disable syncing. This is probably one of the most expressive ways you can do it. So I can say post without syncing to search, pass it this callback, that this callback, whatever I do inside here, it's not going to sync any post to the search index. So in this example, I have a little model factor. I'm just going to make 10 posts, put them in the database, but I don't want it to sync to the search right now for whatever reason. Okay, so if I call scout/without, what was it? Without sync. All right, done. You can say that was pretty fast, right? Because I wasn't syncing to the search. And if I refresh this, we already know this is not going to be here. So nothing's in the search. Now, say I want to come back and make those searchable or whatever. I can actually just do an Eloquent query and then just change searchable onto the end of the Eloquent query. And whatever that returned, it will chunk the results of that and then update them in your search index. So whether that's Algolia or Elastic or whatever else. So in this example, I'm just going to get every post with an ID greater than or equal to 1, and say, make all of these searchable in my search index. All right? So let's go ahead and hit make searchable. Gosh. All right, and we run that. It's done. We refresh this, and it should be all here. So we have all our posts right there, kind of fluently chained off the Eloquent query like that. And I can kind of do this different ways. You know, if I have like a post relationship, I could just say user post searchable. So, and what will happen is this is sort of like if it exists, update it. If it doesn't, create it. You know what I mean? It's kind of like an upsert sort of operation. So when I call searchable, if those posts exist in the search already, just sync all their attributes with my database. If they don't exist, then put them in my search index. So really nice, you know, if you've got some stuff that you're kind of waiting to put in your search, you can do it that way. And the reverse is true. So I can say post where ID greater than or equal to 0 or equal to 1, make all those unsearchable, so remove them from my search index. All right, so if I hit remove from search, I can already tell this time it's going to be dicey. All right, so remove from search. Let's see. And all those are gone. So you can fluently do it off a query that's using Eloquent's macroable features. You can use Eloquent Macros to add functions to the query builder, which is super like dynamic, and I love it, everything about it. Anyway, you'll notice I said earlier, like some of these operations seem slow, and that's because we're making HTTP calls to Algolia, or if you're using Elastic, you might be making calls to Elastic or whatever else, and that can be slow, especially if you're going all the way across the internet in terms of like a hosted service. So what you can actually do is just flip a switch in Scout to say, I want you to queue your operations, like as you sync this stuff. So in my config Scout file, I'm just going to turn queue to true. Queue true. Sounds like a Star Trek episode. Anyway, like once I do that, now anytime I do these type of operations, it will just stick a job onto the queue. So like my app will still feel really fast, even though it's kind of syncing behind the scenes. Because sometimes it doesn't really matter, like if it takes 4 or 5 seconds for your search to sync with your database. Like it's okay if there's this sort of eventual consistency going on. So let me go ahead and start a queue worker. Let me first make sure I don't have any jobs out here. Okay, so let's start PHP Artisan, queue work. And now we're kind of going to do the same operation where I say take all the posts and make them searchable. But if I hit it now, this should be noticeably faster since I'm just using the database queue in this case. And you can see it's already done. Like if I go to my queue worker, there it is. It processed this jobs make searchable, which is what's actually adding them to the Algolia index. And if I refresh this page, then you can see they're probably all synced out here. Yeah, so there they are. So all those operations can be queued. You know, if you're kind of worried about over the network time and performance, that's definitely something you're going to want to turn on with something like this. And all the same operations still work. You know, I could still say user post searchable or anything like that. All right, so let's see. Let me go ahead and turn off queuing. I'll close down that worker. Stop that. All right, so let's go ahead and load up 50 posts into our database without syncing them to Algolia. So I'm going to hit route load. Okay, they should be in our database. And this is using Fakers. It looks like it generates like Alice in Wonderland type stuff. It's using their text generator. Anyway, but I wanted to show you an example of what if I have data in my database that I need to get into my Scout driver. And Scout has a CLI command to import, so I could just do like PHP Artisan Scout, import, and then give it the model. And it will just say, there we go, imported models up to ID 61, all models have been imported. And it's chunking and adding them in chunks and stuff. So if you already have data, like say you already have some kind of blog or search you want to add to your search, then you can just use this import command to sort of get that initial syncing done really easily. So anyway, I just wanted to show that little command off. And then now that I've got it loaded, let's go ahead and do some actual searching. So we just talked about like loading, updating, deleting. So to do some search, it's really simple. I can just say post search, give it some phrase. In this case, since a lot of this text has Alice in it, I just picked that as an example. And then we just call get, basically just like an Eloquent query builder. And so if I hit search here, you can see it's going to search and it's going to map right back to my Eloquent model. So it's as if I queried my database, essentially. Because it's hitting the search, it's saying, okay, I found these IDs, let's get these. Here's your Eloquent models that match this search. Okay, that makes sense? And I just spit out the JSON straight from my route. And I can even do pagination. So if you need to paginate your search results, you just do it just like the query builder. So I say paginate, and it's the exact same response as if I had done paginate on a database query. There's no difference as far as like the output is going to be concerned. And if I do, I can do like page 2, and it goes to page 2. It works all the same. So you can do pagination, searching, stuff like that. Now, it's very common to want to limit your searches based on some like tenant ID or something. So in the case of like a help desk or Forge or something like that, we would say, I want to get all posts that have this word on this account or on this mailbox or whatever. And Scout doesn't support the full range of SQL where clauses, obviously, but it can do basic where this equals this. So that's usually enough for searching for a lot of these typical use cases. So in this example, I'm going to say I want to get all records that match Alice where account ID equals 2. All right, so I'll just hit the where. And you can see all my account IDs are 2. And same with Paginate, like I can do this exact same syntax if I hit it again. And there we go, boom, where clauses for search. So that's basically the rundown of Scout. I think it's pretty cool and sort of saves you some time if you need to do full text search and sort of handles the like the 80%, 90% use case of search where you're not doing anything too crazy. I just want to stuff these records in my database. I want you to give me sensible search results. Like, it's not hard. And this makes it a lot easier and has really nice ranking, or Algolia in particular has really nice like stuff you wouldn't get with necessarily like a like clause on MySQL. So where like, if I misspell something, like say I reverse these two, and I hit where, it's still smart enough to say like there's Alice, So it's most of these search drivers are going to be a lot better than using something like MySQL or a like clause or something like that. So that is a basic overview of Scout, and there's still like 3 more things to go through. So I'm going to have to move on. Okay, so just a brief word of closing on Scout. This is, again, optional package. If you know a search package really well, jump in the code and try to help out because there's no preferential treatment of what kind of search drivers we can have. It's just that this is what I know best, so this is all I can really contribute in a way that makes sense. So if you know Elastic or you know something else, please, once this goes up on GitHub in the next few days, go check that out because it would really help us out to sort of expand the offering a little bit out of the box. All right, so that is Scout. Close that out. I'm going to head over to Mailtrap. We're going to talk about mail for a second. All right. Whew. This is going to take more time than I thought, but bear with me. All right. So mailables, new thing. This is something that's baked in. So this is a core feature of Laravel. And Laravel Mail, like, it's better than it could be worse. Like, don't get me wrong, it could be a lot worse. But it's never something that like set perfectly well with how it works. And before I get started, you can do mail the same way in 5.3 as you've been doing in 5.2. You don't have to change a line of code if you don't want to. But I wanted to have just like a cleaner way of expressing this way of sending mail. And it's just always been, I've had it in my wonder list for like over a year to like better mail, ? So I think I have a little bit of a better way that I want to show you, and you can see what you think. So let's first start with this old controller, the old way of doing mail, or really you can still do it this way, but I can't even fit it on the dang screen. Yeah, so this is the old way of doing mail. You call mail send, you give it a view name, you pass it this array of data which you want to pass to your view, and then you give it a callback which sends you a message which you can then do like to and subject and CC and stuff like that. And like that's fine, like that looks okay. But I just felt like there's some way to do this better. And it's sort of hard for me to express like even what I don't like about this, but it just looks so busy and like, I don't know, like passing the array of stuff, I have to do this use stuff down here. And it always felt kind of like noisy because usually I would be doing it in the context of like this process where I'm doing this stuff, and then I need to send this mail to someone. And it was just like, of this like mail code that would just came out. And it just never like looked good. I don't know. So kind of superficial, I guess. But anyway, I came up with this way to where what I want to do, like in this perfect world, would be I just want to say like, what would it be? Like mail to somebody, send new mail thing, and like be done. Like that's how it looks. And so that's kind of what I was going for and kind of what I've hit. So anyway, let's jump into the new controller. We can just take a look at it. All right, new controller. So I have a new directory here, an app called mail. And it has a class, deployment completed, which represents this mail. That a deployment has completed on one of your servers, let's say. Let's say we're doing something kind of like Forge. And I can basically just pass it as an object, and I can create them. So like, I can say, make mail something happened. And it creates a new class. And all it does is say, this is the view that goes with this mail. Okay, so pretty simple to start out with. Now, since it's a class, I can pass any relevant data into this class. So in this case, I'm passing the server that got updated. Let's go ahead and make sure I have a server here in my mail thing. Yep, I've got a server ready. And so I'm going to pass that to deployment completed. And all that does is just set it to a public property. Now, notice I'm not really like passing that to the view. I have this deployment completed view, and if I look at that, it's using the server. So what's actually happening is there's two ways to do this. Anything that's public, we'll just assume you want access to this in your email. So that's just automatic. And I can just reference any of my email's public properties as view data. The other way to do it, if you don't like that, would be just like when you're rendering a view, any other view. I can just pass stuff like that. So basically like you would in a controller or something like that. So you have a couple options there. I kind of like this automatic way because it sort of corresponds to the way event broadcasting works in Laravel Echo, which is also coming out and I don't have time to cover today. Anyway, and then when I send it, I get a lot more expressive syntax, I feel like, where in this controller, I can just say, to this user, send this mail, and it's like I can tell like what this mail is. Oh, I'm sending the deployment completed mail. It's not like this like grossness of like closures and weird stuff that doesn't really like describe what's happening in my code. All right, so if I hit this new route, hopefully let me log into Mailtrap before I get started. We will get mailables.dev/new. All right, done, and there's our mail. And you can see it just works like normal, but I think it's just a little cleaner way, just a small improvement of how you can do mail if you want to. If you like the closure way, this just kind of builds on top of the closure way. So what this does is like, when I pass it that object, it's just gonna translate it into the equivalent call that you would have made in 5.2, but just in like a cleaner API for accessing that. All right, so that's the most basic way to do it. Now, if I need to send an email to multiple people, like I have this little examples.php file where I can grab this. Let's comment that out. So I can actually do, So I can say to, and then I can call CC, and then I can say send, or I could call BCC or anything like that. So I could do this. I could also just pass it like a collection of users, so send it to all these users, stuff like that. So I've got 2 users in my database. Let's see. Got Taylor and Yaz, he'll be so happy. And I can do it just like that. I think if I call new, it should just work fine here. New email, it's to Taylor. If I look at the more info, CC to Yaz. So you can do it just like that. Anyway, I think it's a little more expressive. It's up to you. I think it's a cool new feature in 5.3 and sort of like cleans up some of that code. And so you can also queue them. So I've got this new queue route, and if we look at that, yeah, I can just call mail queue. So I mean, you could call mail queue using the other syntax, and this just lets you do it this way. So I can say mail to this user, queue this email, start up a queue worker, hit new/queue. It's really fast. We wait for this to come in. There it is, and there it is in my email. So you can do it, all the same possibilities that were available to you in 5.2, you can do it this way too. All right, don't want to labor on that too much. You can also customize, so like I have this server damaged email, which is a different email. So like you might need to do attachments. So in your build, it's all the same methods that you could have done in your closure, right? So I can say subject, attach, this path, exact same methods, exact same signatures that you're used to. So in this example, I'm just going to attach this file. I'm going to customize the subject. Now, one thing I forgot to mention, I didn't specify a subject here, but it actually saw that the class name is deployment completed and say, oh, deployment completed, I guess. So it will actually like make a sensible subject if you don't specify one. But in this one, I am actually going to specify one, which probably might be more common, I guess. And I'm going to attach a file, and then also I'm going to embed an attachment, embed an image, which generates a CID using SwiftMailer and all that. So all the same power is available to you, just in kind of a different API, which I find more expressive and easier to read. All right, so what is this called? New custom. All right, so if I hit that, I'm guessing this attachment is going to take a little bit longer. So if it goes too much longer, we'll just move on. But anyway, check that out. Use the make mail in 5.3 and play with that. I think you'll find it's quite a bit more expressive to do your email that way. And I'm not going to let that attachment send. OK, because we got to keep moving to another new feature. All right, let me cut off that queue worker. Stop that. Go here. Yeah, we'll still need this. I'm going to clear this out for now. Close that. All right. Let me go back to my notes. So once I did the mail stuff, I'd kind of been thinking for a long time, like, I want a better way to communicate with users in general. And we sort of explored this in Spark with the notification stuff in Spark, where if you have a copy of Spark, there's like a little bell up in your nav bar that shows you if your user has new notifications. And I was just kind of toying with that idea because in all of my apps, I've had to send various notifications. I've just sent email notifications. I just send maybe put notifications in the database like Spark does so that I can show them in some UI with some little red bubble on a bell icon. I might need to send something to Slack. In the case of Envoyer or Forge, I might need to send someone an SMS. And I just need to send, it's all the same notification in a way. It's just all delivered through these various notification channels. And this has been another one of those things that's been on like my list of like, how is it even possible to make this easier? But I really wanted to take a crack at it. And so I took a crack at it with 5.3. And I think it's going to be pretty cool. I think you'll like it. So let's just jump right in. So if I go to my web PHP, you can see I can have a notification. And again, this directory is not there out of the box. It's just there if you make a notification. And it looks kind of similar to email, but it's not exactly the same. So notifications are for quick updates about your app. Hey, this deployment failed. Hey, this server finished provisioning. Hey, you asked for a reset password link or whatever. Quick stuff that you need to send out. And so it has a limited feature set in terms of like, you can't attach files to notifications, or you can't like, CC people. That's very like email specific. It has to be general notification stuff. All right, and so what this looks like is I can have a notification. I can pass it stuff just like a mail object, right? So this is an app notifications, deployment completed. I'm passing it a server. And the first method I get to is this via method. So I'm saying I want to deliver this method via mail, or this notification via mail. Now it's passing me the notifiable, right? Which is really going to be probably a user, but it wouldn't necessarily have to be a user. So like in Forge's case, you might have a Slack channel linked to a server, which I want to send a notification really to that Slack channel. So I would put a notifiable trait on a server, not on a user. So it could be a user, but might not. And right here, I have it hard-coded to mail, but I could inspect, what is this user's notification preferences? Do they want SMS? Do they want email? Do they want Slack? Do I just need to stick it in a database? And I can just return an array of drivers because the notification system is driver-based. And I can say, I want you to send this notification through these channels. And let's just start with mail for the demo. And when I specify this, I'm just going to say, I want you to give this line of text, this call to action, this line of text. So that's the basic structure. Lines of text, call to actions, and notifications. And when it fans out to different delivery mechanisms, it can translate that into looking different ways. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. Let's see if I have something in my database. Servers, all right, I have a server. And so what this looks like is on my user class, I have a notifiable trait. So I want this user, I'm going to use this notifications feature in Laravel, so I want to be able to send them notifications. All right, so I just say user notify, new deployment completed, done. And that notification can figure out how am I supposed to be sent, and based on this current user's settings or whatever. In this case, we have mail, so let's just hit this route. .dev. All right, and you can see I get a mail. And now what's cool is the mail driver comes with a nice responsive email template that I don't have to code if I don't want to. I can export this view into my own application and customize it however I want, but you have a sensible default out of the box that's, responsive and scales well, and you can configure your app name. Yeah, thanks. All right, I'm gonna try to, if I get going too fast, I'm sorry, but we'll have a couple days to talk about it. I gotta press on. Yeah, you can export this, customize it. Real quick before I move on from this driver, say you might have there's different states of notification, so you might have an error notification. Like say a server deployment failed. Maybe I want that to be a little different, so I can just say this is an error, and if the driver has a way to convey that, it can do it. If it doesn't, that's fine. If it doesn't have any notion of different levels, it doesn't have to worry about it. But in mail, we actually can do a few things. So if I say error here and send another one, hopefully this works. There we go. Now you can see this one, it says whoops, and it has a red state. So out of the box, the template has 3 different looks. It has that default blue look, which is called info level. You can have a success state, and you can have an error state. So if I do change this to success and run it again, I think it just has, I think the only difference in success is it has a green button for mail at least. Yeah, and you can export that template and customize it however you want. The way you see how it says Laracon demo up here? That's your application name. There's a new setting in config app where you can set a human readable name for your app, which can be used for that kind of thing if you want. You can also set a logo. If you want to put a logo up in that spot, you can do that, but I just use text for this example. All right, so let's get rid of that success and keep moving down this routes file real quick. All right, so database. So let's go ahead and add. So we go into our via method, say we want to add a channel to this notification, and we just say database. Now, if I look at my database, I already have one deleted, don't look. There's this table that holds them. So it holds, the notifiable type. This is a polymorphic eloquent relation, so kind of voodoo ground here, but it holds the notifiable type and notifiable ID. It holds the level, so that's going to be, info, success, error. It holds the intro, the outro, the action text, the action URL. Has it been read or not? So there's a red column. So you update this however you want. Laravel has no way of knowing when you want to set that to read, so you can change that however you want. And this basically mirrors the notification stuff in Spark, really, the database table. All right, so now all I did was add that to the driver, or to the via method, and I'm gonna just notify the same way. So this code doesn't care about how this notification is being delivered. And that's what always bothered me about how I did notifications in the past, was you always end up with all this crap about how your notifications are being delivered, and I don't want this code to care about that. So if I hit this database route, it's still sending mail. Remember, it's doing both now. It's doing both channels. So I got the mail. If I look at my database, I have it here. Okay, so it's going to both channels in this case. Now, what's cool about that is there's an event that says a notification was sent. So this is particularly useful on your database driver because say you're using WebSockets or something, and when you hear this event that, oh, a notification was sent, I want to update the notification on the web UI, in real time. So when you hear this event, you have access to the notifiable user that received the notification. And in this case, I'm just gonna log out their email so you can see that I'm getting it. But you can just use that, and I just show that to bring that to your attention, that you can use that to do whatever you want when a notification is sent. So I hit this event route. Let me make sure my log is empty. Okay. I hit event. We're still sending through mail and the database. And that event should fire, and you can see I got 2 because it was the database and the mail notification, right? So 2 notifications were sent. All right, so let's see, going back to, just keep going. Slack, so let's say we want to send a Slack notification. So I can do that through this. So let's go ahead and just add a Slack thing here. All right, and of course we can just use Guzzle to make this call, but now we're running into this situation where some drivers are gonna have to know more information about the user. So how do I know which Slack channel to send this to for this notification? So what you can actually do is notifications let you define these methods on your user class. So And the convention is kind of route notification for whatever, Slack. And in this case, I just return what information that driver might need. So in this case, I'm going to return this Slack webhook URL, which I've already got populated in my database. So like if I was configuring some other driver, I might have route notification for voice. I don't know, whatever you want, whatever your driver is. Okay, and so then if I go to I have a little Laravel Slack room, I have this configured to. And remember, we've still got mail and database going, and now we're going to add, I also want this to go to Slack. So let's see. Let this load up here. All right, and there we go. And let's go back to here. And I think we should just be able to call Slack. Hopefully it works. Kind of a lot of moving parts here. Call Slack. Might take a second because now we're doing like 3 notification deliveries. And there we go, I got a Slack message. So just that easy, I was able to like fan out a notification to email, database, and Slack. And I could do it, I did it hard-coded, but you would probably look at your notifiable to see like what channels do they want. Now, what if I want to do SMS? So this is another common way to communicate with users. So I can just come in, for this example, I have a Nexmo driver ready to go. So I'm just going to come into deployment completed. We'll just tag this on. I want this to go to Slack, database, mail, SMS. All right, and so the SMS driver has a convention. So if it sees a phone number attribute on the notifiable, it will use that. Otherwise, I can do kind of the same thing I did with Slack. So I could grab like route notification from Nexmo, give it the information it needs, which in this case is just going to be a phone number. And that will tell it how to route. And I've already configured, in my configuration settings, I've already configured my, Nexmo API keys. All right, so I've added that. I've added to the via method, and now we should just be able to call it and get all of those, let's see, Nexmo. We're adding like even more time onto this request as we go. Well, I got my phone here, so once this finishes, let's see, there's the Slack. Yep, there's my text. I just got the text. Deployment has completed on your staging server. View deployment with the link. Thanks for being a customer. So it's really easy to send out on these various notification channels in a way that doesn't clutter up your code with all kinds of junk. And that's all the drivers I have to show right now. But again, that's something you can add. If you have a different way you want to do notifications, you can add a driver, and all you really have to do is just translate that notification into something that makes sense for that driver. And you can just do your notifications in that way. So queuing, so you notice that request time again was like kind of bogging down as we added stuff. So if I come into my deployment completed, let me close out some of this. I can say implements, this is just like any other queue job. I can just say this should queue. I can implement should queue, and then I can start up a worker. That's empty, and now should be a lot faster. What was it, just queue? Yeah, really fast, and that's queued. And we should see those jobs come through here, hopefully. There's a Slack message. Let's see. Yep, there's our email, and yep, I got a text just now. So all the notifications are coming in, and you can queue them all for real fast response times. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of notifications in Laravel 5.3. So the password reminder system actually bakes in with this email notification out of the box. So like a password reminder looks kind of like this email now in Laravel 5.3 instead of going through like the kind of more basic email template. All right, I think that is pretty much it for notifications. We still have one more piece. I'm going to come up here. I'm going to make a note right here as an aside. Should I get 2 events for 2 notifications? Just to remind myself to check that out later. I think it makes sense. OK. All right. So this is the last piece, and actually the biggest piece, believe it or not. So hopefully we may go a little over. Let me get into this passport folder. Close this out. OK. Let me check my database. All right, look empty. Okay, so I'm gonna have to preface this one a little bit. Let me grab my notes here. Okay, in Laravel 5.2, we laid the groundwork for what I wanted this to be, or I just didn't have time to like sort of do it with 5.2. And the groundwork I mean is we introduced this notion of multiple auth drivers. So you could have a web auth driver, which uses session, and you can use an API auth driver, which uses tokens. And the token auth driver in 5.2 is just like, it works. It's just like a proof of concept of how you could do it. And you can even use it on real apps, and it's not going anywhere. But what it does is basically say each user has an API token on their database record, and if you pass API request with that token in the header or the query string or whatever, then that API request is authenticated. And that's fine for a lot of apps, and a lot of small apps can do just fine with nothing more complex than that. But there are people who do want like a more fleshed out API authentication layer. So in Laravel 5.3, I wanted to ship that package. And this is, again, an optional package like Scout. It's not something that you have to pull in out of the box or that will be installed out of the box. But it is called Laravel Passport, and basically a full OAuth 2 server implementation in Laravel in like 5 minutes. All right, so all I've done in this project, this is a brand new Laravel project, all I've done is install Laravel Passport and update a composer so that we didn't have to sit through that on this. But I haven't done really anything else to this project, as far as I know. I've been working on it for a little while, but okay, so we're just gonna start from here, from a blank Laravel project, and I'm gonna implement an OAuth 2 server like right here on stage at Laracon, so kind of brave, but I definitely would not have done this a year ago, so I think this will help you see, like, if you ever tried to do an OAuth 2 server, it's kind of a beast, and hopefully this will help you see like how much time this could save you if you need to do like robust API authentication. All right, I might move kind of fast because there's a lot to cover here. Okay, so we're starting from scratch. We have Passport pulled in. Let's go first to our config app. We're gonna add the service provider. All right, Laravel Passport service provider. We add that. Now, one thing I want to show you, this is going to give us an opportunity to highlight another Laravel 5.3 feature. But when I run PHP Artisan Migrate now, you can see I got migrations that aren't included with Laravel out of the box. And this is a new feature in 5.3 where a package can register migrations without having to export them out to your app's migration folder. All right, so we got that done. I've migrated my database. The next thing I'm going to do is go to my user. I'm going to say use Laravel Passport has API tokens. As API tokens. That's just going to add, it adds like 2 helper methods to the user, which we'll look at a little later. Then I'm going to go, so if I'm implementing OAuth server, I need some routes, right? Because how many of you have done OAuth or worked with OAuth too? Okay, good number of people. So you know that when you have an OAuth application, you kind of like redirect the user to an app. They get this screen that says, hey, this app wants to connect to your account. Do you approve or deny? Like kind of if you've ever done login with GitHub or login with Facebook, you've done OAuth, the OAuth flow. So we need routes to handle those incoming requests. So I'm going to go to my auth service provider. I think we started at 5.10, so we'll see how long this takes to do a full OAuth server. Import Passport. And I'm just going to say Passport routes. I can customize this more. There are ways to customize this, which I don't want to get into right now, but I'm just going to say Passport routes because that's going to register the typical routes. It's like 10 routes that I need to do OAuth 2. All right. I'm also going to do, this is optional, I'm going to define scopes. So in OAuth 2, you can have scopes for your tokens. And this lets you limit what a token can do. So like on GitHub, for example, there's a user scope, which lets people access just your name and email address and stuff. And then there's like a repo scope that lets if you have that permission, you can access the repo or repository information. And this just gives you like, kind of like permissions on different tokens. So I'm going to say Passport tokens can, and this is where I'm going to define my scopes right here. And I'm going to define one called conference that says, and this description I give it is just any description you want to give it. Passport doesn't care. I'm just going to say access your conference information since we're at a conference. And I can list scopes, as many scopes as I want here, that I want my tokens to be able to have. All right, and then I think the last thing I need to do here is change this driver from token to Passport because we're going to be using Passport for our authentication. All right, and then we've done that. Now let's just go ahead and generate like the default like thing so people can sign up. And hit passport.dev. And I'm just going to go ahead and make an account here. All right, now I'm logged in. Now, first let's talk about, again, if someone wants to integrate with your application, you're going to have a way for them to come in, log in, register their application with their redirect URL and all of that. And what Passport does is it actually exposes a JSON API that you can hook into with your front end. So it has all the controllers filled out for those routes, and you can sort of hook into them any way you want. So if you're using Vue, you can use that. If you're using Angular, you can use that. It doesn't really make assumptions about like how your front end looks necessarily, but the controllers are there for you. But for this case, I actually have like example implementations of what this would look like. Just to help you get started, you don't have to use them, but it's sort of like, here's a reference implementation for what this would look like. So we need 3 things, and I'm going to grab them. I have them written as Vue components. We're going to come to our home. I'm going to just delete that, and I'm just going to put those in. So we need Passport clients, which is going to let people make OAuth clients. We need Passport authorized clients, and what that's going to do is it's going to show us a list of the applications we've authorized to access our account. And then we need Passport personal access tokens, which is going to give us a component that lets us just generate a token right there in the UI that we can play with in the API. And you'll see what I mean here in a second. So I've dropped these components in. Let's go ahead and hit that route. And now we have this new UI here. Let me make it a little bigger. So now I've got this kind of stubbed out UI that lets me play with Passport and start working with OAuth. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. Let's see, make sure I'm on the right spot. OK, so let's make a client. We're just going to call this consumer. Consumer.dev. I'm going to say that I already have this consumer.dev application set up, and I have a route called callback that I want to redirect to. And I'm just going to say create. It gives me a secret here, which I can grab, and a client ID, which is 1. So we will take that client, go to consumer, and pop this open. All this does is just it does that redirect that I mentioned. So there's the redirect, to redirect to passport dev /OAuth/authorized, which is just the default convention for that route. I want to do the authentication code flow. I want the conference scope, so I can tell it what scopes I want. Here's my callback. And then I need to paste in my secret that I just got. This callback route is when they call back, when Passport calls back to my app or whatever. Client ID is 1, so that's good. And then once we come back, I'm just going to dump out whatever access token we got back. Does that make sense? Are y'all kind of with me on like what's going on there? OK, so I've got that filled in. I think I can just hit consumer.dev, and hopefully that works. All right, so we get this screen. Again, you can export this screen. This is just a basic implementation, but it does like show you, consumers requesting access to your account. This application will be able to access your conference information. That's that human-friendly description we gave that scope. So I can either authorize or cancel this, which I'm going to authorize it. It's going to send me back, and there's my access token, which is actually a JWT token. Because we're using the latest version of League's OAuth 2 package. It's sort of like the foundation, which uses JWT. So there's your JWT token. And I can just take that right into a REST client. So before we do that, remember we have 2 routes files. We have web and API. In API, I have a route called /user that just returns the current user. So once I have my token, this is how I would get like user information out from the service if I wanted to. And so let's just go ahead and try to call that with our new access token. So I can go in here to Postman, which is just a little REST client. So we can make this. So I'm going to call a small, but passport.dev /API/user. Because remember, this route was loaded in that group that prefixes it with API. I come to my headers, and I can just pass that token I just got as a bearer token, and I get a successful API response. So there you go. All right. Yeah, so let's keep on going here. All right, we did that. Now, yeah, so I can also revoke that token from my UI, from that sample implementation. I can, if I refresh this, now that I've authorized, you can see that consumer is now listed as an authorized application with these scopes. And again, these are just reference UI implementations. This is not you don't have to use these. It's just something on GitHub that you can look at and say, oh, I need to make these calls, and my HTML kind of needs to look like this, or whatever you want. So don't get too hung up on like what this looks like. It's just there to help you kind of get started. But I can revoke that application, so if I don't want that application to be able to access my stuff anymore, and this corresponds to almost all apps that do OAuth are going to have these same screens. GitHub has these same screens. But anyway, so I can do that. That's one way I can get a token. One thing I like that's not really built into the League package, which I wanted definitely Passport to have, is, and it's also something that GitHub offers with their stuff, is I just want to be able to create a token, like in the UI. Just give me a token, because I just want to play with your API in my client. I don't want to have to go through like the whole redirect flow just to get a token. And so what I can actually do is I can make every token is associated with a client, right? Like consumer was my client before. I can do Passport, client, and I say I want to make a personal access client. And this is going to make a client for our own application to issue tokens. Oh, I'm instilling consumer. And it just asked me what to name it. I'm just going to set the default. But anyway, that's all we need to do. And now I can just come in here and say, I want to make a token called my token. I want it to have these scopes. I can hit create, and boom, here's my token. Which I'm using like a pretty big encryption key. That's why it looks so big. So I grab that, and I can basically just use this, just like any other token. I can paste it right here, and I get a good API response. And I can delete those tokens or revoke them or whatever I want to do. But that lets you just kind of play around with API. So Passport supports that as well. Now let's continue talking about the scopes for a second. So if we have scopes, probably we're going to want to like limit our routes based on those scopes. So we do that. So we have middlewares for that. So like I'm going to come into my examples and grab those and put them in my HTTP kernel. So there's two middleware, scope and scopes, and you can name them anything you want. So scope is just going to check for any singular scope in this list, and scopes is going to check for all scopes. So if I come to API, I can just do, I want this route to say you have to have the conference scope, which we have. Okay. So if I hit this, it should still work because we have that scope, right? And we still get a good API response. Now, I'm using scope, so I can, as long as I have any of these scopes, it should still work. So even if I list another scope, since I have conference, it's still going to let me through. So there you go, that still works. But now, if I change it to scopes, now you can tweak those names. You can change it to all scopes or any scopes, whatever you want. This says I have to have all these scopes, plural. Okay, so this should fail because I don't have the something scope on my token. So you can see I get unauthenticated in this situation. So it lets you really easily, come into your API and sort of set those scopes on your API routes, and start limiting what people can do on certain routes. All right, so let me go ahead and take that off. All right, now one final thing on Passport before I wrap up I wanted to cover is this is something I did in Spark, and this is something that's not set up for you if you use any kind of OAuth package, which kind of just gives you the base implementation of stuff. But what I like to do is I have this API route, right, /API/user, and I like to build, as I'm playing with things, like the API first, and I want to share that API with like my web UI. I want it to consume the same API as maybe my hybrid mobile client consumes. And that gets a little cumbersome because, like, say I come into my, I'm going to use this example.view that I used earlier. And let's come into home.blade, and I'm just going to put this right here at the top. Okay, and like say we were to come in here, and when this loads, we want to say this HTTP GET API user, then take the response. Let's just log that out. Now, we wouldn't expect this to work, right? And it's not going to work out of the box because we're not passing any token when we hit this API route. So we're going to get an unauthenticated error or something like that. Let me go ahead and run my gulp here to recompile this component since I changed it. I'll go ahead and start gulp watch while I'm in here. Okay, so let's go ahead and hit this page, and let's open up our console. And I expect us to get an unauthenticated response here. Yeah, great. 401 unauth unauthorized, and you can see the body's a JSON that says error unauthenticated. So this is what we would expect here, but it would be nice like if I could just seamlessly call my API without having to worry about like any of that. Like I'm already logged in. I know I'm logged in. So like just let me call my own API. Like I just want to get information from it. So there's actually a way to do this, and it's a little tricky actually, but Passport makes it really easy for you. So you come into HTTP kernel, and I'm going to add another middleware here to my web stack. So for my web routes, I want to add Laravel, Passport, HTTP, middleware, create fresh API token. Okay, so what this is going to do, and this is a little technical, but it's going to, if you have this middleware, it will put a cookie on your web routes called Laravel token. It will contain a JWT token, that cookie will. Within that JWT, so then when any requests get made to this API route, it's going to send that cookie, right? Now, that would typically be a problem because like, say some third-party website simulates a form request to your site, they call an API route, it sends the cookie. Since it's an API route, it's not requiring CSRF protection, and people are able to forge requests into your API. And so you have to do this tricky stuff, what's called a synchronized token pattern or something like that. Synchronized token pattern, I think is what people call it, where we embed the CSRF token into the JWT, and then we require a CSRF header if you send that cookies, and they have to match. So because other domains can't read your cookies, they don't know what to put in the CSRF header to make those two values match. But what that lets us do is Passport will say, do I have an API token when you make an API request? If I do, great, let's just authenticate that way. Okay, do I have a token cookie? If I do, let's say, does the CSRF token in the JWT match the CSRF token in the header? If they do, only our own app could have made that application because we're the only ones that can read the cookies to know what the CSRF is. All right, and so what that lets you do is just by adding that middleware, I can come in here to home, and now I can make valid API requests without having to worry about passing a token for my web URL. And I think this is like a super nice way to work because what that lets me do is my API doesn't really have to be an afterthought, right? Because it's so easy to set up. And OAuth server, it's only been really 16 minutes since we started. And we already have a full OAuth server with scopes and a sample implementation and all that. And I can make API requests from my JavaScript. And I like that because I can put my API first, right? And kind of define that at the beginning. And then use it, I can consume it myself from my web client. And then I can consume it from, I can let third parties consume it if I want to let, if I want to have an API for my service or whatever, like GitHub does. Or I could consume it from my phone app or whatever I want to do, my hybrid app. So it's a really nice way to work, and I think once you get started with it, you'll find it's like your preferred go-to way of building this kind of stuff. And Passport takes care of all of that for you, and I think really fleshes out the whole API story in Laravel and where I wanted to take it when I first did multiple auth drivers in 5.2. We just had the basic token driver, and now we have Passport that you can pull in and have a full OAuth server in like 5 minutes and be ready to go. And this would take you quite a while. Like, I mean, you have to implement a lot of interfaces, figure out a lot of tables, figure out a lot of stuff. And this hopefully will make your life a lot easier if you're building APIs. So that's sort of a review of some of the highlights of Laravel 5.3 minus Echo, which I covered in a screencast before. So yeah, mailable objects, notifications, Scout package, which you can pull in, driver-based full-text search, Passport package, which you can pull in for full OAuth 2 server in Laravel, including, you know, calling your own API from your web UI and all that good stuff with scopes. So that's a highlight of Laravel 5.3. I just have, I'll take a few extra minutes to take questions since there was a lot of stuff and maybe you have some questions. So I'll take 3 or 4 questions and then we can chat more outside. So pretty cool. What do you think? Good? Any questions? Here we go. Yep. Yeah, you can add your own. So like out of the box, it's, what's the authentication code, of course. I wrote a custom grant type for personal access tokens, and it's real easy to hook in your own grant types, really. I mean, just like if you were using the league package. I mean, yeah. So it's basically going to be you're going to be used to it because this is going to be the same methods. Yeah, it's the latest league, so which uses JWT. So, yep.
What's the default expiry time, and is there like built-in?
Yeah, it will do refresh tokens. I was doing long-lived tokens here. I was just issuing them for 100 years for this demo. But you can configure, like if you want refresh, you want your tokens to expire like that, and you want to do the refresh token thing. All that's set up. It was kind of time limited to show it up, but it's all there and possible. Yep.
Are some of those features going to be available in Lumen?
Yeah, so like the token guard to authenticate, that will need to be available on Lumen because like if you have an API microservice, you want to be able to use like the same authentication stuff. So definitely the guard, I think is something that needs to go to Lumen. Whether like all that full UI stuff has to go to Lumen, I don't really think that has to be the case, but at least you need to be able to authenticate probably the request coming in. So yeah, that's something we'll have to figure out. I mean, Lumen usually comes out like a month or two after the main framework. So once that comes out, we'll kind of like try to figure out how we want to do that in Lumen. So.
What about the other packages like Scaffolding?
Scout, like when will they come out? Or Scout is just a package you can pull in. I mean, I guess anywhere, but it's just a regular package. Anything else? All right, well, we're going to be around for a few days, honestly.